Let's have a nice cup of TRE in the afternoon with Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Damian, an award-winning writer and filmmaker whose latest book, The Drowned Places, is a cultural exploration of diving, investigating sunken human ruins around the world and the marine life that thrive there now. Welcome to the show, Damian.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us. So this is something you've started doing fairly recently, is it? Diving? It's not something you've done all your life.
Well, I started later than a lot of divers. I was in my 30s and I first dived in Spain in a little bay called Cala Cortina near Cartagena. And they're what they call tri-dives where, you know, there's a limit. You can only dive to 30 feet with an instructor, but that was where I got the bug. That was about 6 years ago. It feels like a lot longer, probably because of COVID. But yeah, I was a bit of a late starter, but like lots of people, once I'd started, that was it for me, really. I wasn't going to stop.
Yeah. And was it how you imagined it would be? I mean, how would you describe it?
I think divers like to see the glamorous side of diving, mostly the sort of James Bond adventurer, the kind of military side, perhaps a little bit, the far-flung destinations. But what I found interesting about it was it's a sort of mixture of glamour and adventure on the one hand, but also it is slightly ridiculous. You know, particularly when you start diving, you can end up looking a bit silly with all the gear and tubes sticking out and sort of staggering your way down the beach, flapping about in the water. So this isn't an account of diving from the perspective of someone who's been there and done it all for years and had a stellar career. It's what it feels like being a scared beginner who's trying to get into the sport. And for me, it was really a way of accessing underwater ruins and getting to find out about the Atlantis story, which I've been obsessed with all my life. So I had a particular set of reasons for getting into scuba diving. And along with being a late starter, that's led to some humorous moments, which I write about in this book, as well as the sort of wonder and the awe-inspiring nature of the ocean.
Yeah. So tell us about your obsession with Atlantis then, and how diving has helped or maybe fueled that even more.
Like lots of people who are interested in Atlantis, I had a really mixed idea of what it meant when I was a kid. I certainly had no idea that it originated in the works of Plato, the famous Greek philosopher, perhaps the most famous of all philosophers. For me, it was a strange mishmash of things influenced by sort of futuristic underwater TV shows and films. And then the idea of ruins underwater, sort of Greek or Roman ruins. But what I was to discover was that image of Atlantis really comes from Jules Verne, the French writer, and it dates from the 19th century. So it's really quite a recent idea that Atlantis is a physical place that you could possibly find the remains of, because in Plato's original story, it's completely obliterated at the end of a war with ancient Athens, and there's nothing left but a shoal of mud, he says, a kind of area of ooze at the bottom of the sea. So what Atlantis means and has meant has changed a lot over the centuries. At times it's been used as a pretext for colonialism. So the idea that the New World sort of was Atlantis was used by the conquistadors, for instance, as an argument for their ownership of parts of the New World. So it's a story that's meant all kinds of things, some of them fantastical and wondrous, and some of them quite dangerous throughout 2,500 years of history.
So how do you feel about it now? What do you believe it is? Do you think it's something that you can find?
Well, I discovered a thing or two that I didn't know on this journey, which took me from England to Spain to Naples to Greece to Jamaica eventually. And I won't say too much about it because I'd obviously hope that someone listening to this might be interested in reading the book. But it's Atlantis for me is the totality of what everyone has thought about it, really. So it's all those crazy images of underwater mermen and mermaids in films. It's the story itself that we find in Plato, but it also ended up being, for me, a sort of metaphor for the civilization of the life of the sea. So marine life itself, the more you look at it and the more time you spend in its company, it really turns out to be indescribably complex. And the simplest structure, like the shell of a hermit crab, ends up looking, when you've looked at it for long enough, like a civilization of its own. And in a biological sense, it really is. So I ended up finding a whole other Atlantis that I wasn't even looking for. And that's the bizarre civilization of that other world, really, of the sea. And it being another world in the sense almost like space is another world to the astronaut, to the aquanaut, which is a term that scuba divers used to use for themselves. The sea is another world as well. And I think it's a wonder that we're able to visit it. And really, my book was, in a way, a sort of riposte to the idea that diving is a sort of banal, ordinary holiday activity, just like going to a beach and playing volleyball, because sometimes it's treated that way. But the people who invented scuba diving equipment saw it as a complete technological marvel that was going to revolutionize how we looked at the world. And I prefer to see it that way, as a sort of miracle of invention, really.
Yeah. And I guess it makes a massive difference where you're diving. You know, obviously you can look on the internet and guidebooks and things and find out the best and most impressive places in the world to dive, which a lot of divers will actively seek out and arrange holidays accordingly. But you can dive in all kinds of places and then be really disappointed that there's not much going on down there, because it's not always, as you say, glamorous and exciting.
You can dive in all kinds of places, including, unfortunately for me, England, where I've done most of my diving. And having first dived in the Mediterranean and then returning to England to complete my training in a sort of ghoulish green lakes and off the coast, where the visibility sometimes resembles the water in a blocked up toilet, I learned that diving has to be satisfying for a number of reasons, because it's not always visually satisfying. So sometimes you've got to be happy to see a small amount of life that's all you can see in the couple of feet ahead of you that is visible. And sometimes you have to take pleasure in even less, like using your instruments to navigate properly when you can't really see anything at all. So at 18 to 20 meters on the bottom of the English Channel, when the visibility is poor, it can be almost pitch dark. And that presents challenges all of its own. And unlike many divers who don't appear to be scared of environments like that, I am scared, probably like most people. And overcoming that fear and persevering in the hope of finding new revelations is another part of the drowned places, and something that I hope might lead some other people to take the plunge if they were initially feeling a bit too scared to do so.
Yeah. I was going to say, what is the attraction of doing it in those kinds of places, aside from the fact that you're doing it in much colder water, which has to be less enjoyable. But if you know that you're not likely to see lots of pretty, colourful coral and fish and things like that, then what are you doing it for? What is the attraction of doing it?
One thing that does exist in areas where the water isn't crystal clear and full of technicolor sea life is the remnant of human life. So the ruins that humans have left behind are fascinating. And when they're underwater and in that environment and they've been colonized by marine life, even when the visibility isn't great or the color palette is more sort of brownish and green rather than a rainbow of spectacular color, it's still a wonderful thing to be able to do that. If you go to somewhere like Port Royal in Jamaica, where I was lucky enough to go while writing The Drowned Places, half of the ancient, certainly the old pirate city of Port Royal is now underwater. So you can walk a section of street on land where there are houses where people still live. And then to see the rest of that street, you have to put your diving gear on and go underwater. But you're on the same street, and probably a street on which the ancestors of modern Jamaicans used to live. So for me, that's a magical thing, regardless of how far or how short a distance you can see, because it's almost like you get to live in two timelines. And if you're interested in underwater ruins, then diving can be fantastically rewarding, even when you've got a job to see your hand in front of your face.
Yeah. So what are some of the underwater ruins that you've seen in closer to UK or even in the UK?
In the UK, I was going to say I've been lucky enough to dive a couple of shipwrecks. To say lucky would be simplifying it a little bit. The English Channel is full of wrecks. It's one of the most shipwreck littered stretches of water in the world. It's been such a busy shipping lane for thousands of years, really. And there are estimated to be at least 3,500 wrecks that we know about.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
All the boats of smugglers. And so I've dived on a couple of those. However, when things go wrong on a wreck dive in the dark, it can escalate pretty quickly. And there's an account in this book of a dive that I felt fairly lucky to return from alive. So, but I would say that in spite of the danger, it's a uniquely rewarding activity because you're communing with a kind of sacred space in a way. It's kind of like a cemetery of sorts on the seabed, and they're just surrounded by fish and often full of conger eels, which, although they're scary, I think are very charismatic and amazing animals. So there's lots that can be seen closer to home, although if you want a more pleasant sort of daytime shallow water experience, I'd recommend visiting somewhere like Pavlopetri in Greece off the southern coast of the Peloponnese, which is a fantastically preserved Bronze Age city, so many thousands of years old, and you can access that just with a snorkel and fins.
Oh, amazing.
And the water's warmer and the water's clearer, so that's the easier option.
Yeah. So can you tell us what happened to you then that you almost lost your life or scared that you were going to?
What I'll say is when you're planning your dive gear for a dive, it's a good idea to check all your clips and make sure there isn't anything that could get accidentally hooked onto anything. And it's a good idea to ask your buddy or another diver to do those checks with you. I made the mistake that lots of people do when they get to a kind of early intermediate stage in diving. You can become a little bit blasé about your equipment. And I thought I knew what I was doing by this stage. As I learned, and I now know, I've been diving for a few years, but I'm absolutely still a novice really compared to professional divers or high level technical divers. And I made a kit mistake, which could have cost me dearly. Luckily, it didn't. The person I was diving with was alert and had the right stuff, and he did me a favour, which I won't soon forget. But it involved clips and ropes, and that's as much as I'm going to say on the radio.
Okay. Well, thankfully, you lived to tell the tale, and therefore have learned a very valuable lesson.
Yes, I would say checking twice is a good idea. Checking 3 times is a great idea. And just watch which kind of clips you use to attach equipment to your BCD. But anyone who dives who's listening to this is probably shaking their head and thinking, well, we all know that anyway. But I'm perhaps not as thorough as your average diver, and I've learned the hard way that I need to keep an eye on that.
Yeah. And if you had to, I mean, you might have already told us, but if you had to pick out your most exciting or beautiful or whatever, your top diving experience so far, what would that be?
For me, it would be diving in the ruins of the sunken pirate city of Port Royal in Jamaica, which I've talked about. For me, that was a childhood dream. I had a Lego set when I was a kid, which was inspired by that place.
Oh, amazing.
Going up there and learning about its history from local people. Some of that history is very dark, but then managing to persuade the Jamaican National Heritage Trust to allow me to dive in that place because it's a restricted area. That was a lifetime achievement for me. And even though the visibility absolutely wasn't great, it felt like I would say almost a spiritual privilege to be able to dive in such a historically significant location. It's the only sunken city of its kind in the entire Western Hemisphere. It was once the most important city in the whole Caribbean, certainly from a colonial perspective, if not from the perspective of the local indigenous civilizations. So that was a real privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah. And is there anywhere else that you haven't dived yet that you'd really love to, that would be an amazing thing, like the Titanic, for example?
Well, the Titanic's probably deeper than I'll ever manage to get to in my lifetime, certainly diving wise, but probably even in a submersible. I would love to see it, but I can't see that happening. But there are places I've written about in this book which are fascinating, which I unfortunately didn't manage to get to in person, like the ruins of the the ancient city of Xicheng, or Lion City, in Qiandao Lake in China, which, I mean, if you look up images of them, there are spectacular carvings of dragons and mythological creatures. That would be a dream dive for me. That's a challenging one at up to 40 meters in a cold lake. But if luck's on my side and I keep improving my skills, perhaps one day I'll get there. If anyone listening to this has seen those ruins, I'm exceedingly jealous.
And do you, when you're diving, have you always got a buddy with you? Is this something that you do with friends, or do you just do it in a kind of organized group? How does it work?
In the amateur diving group, the modern wisdom is that you absolutely always dive with a buddy. The statistics show that if you're diving with someone else, the risks of injury or death just plummet compared to the risks of diving alone. Solo diving obviously is possible, and you can train in that direction. And there are occasions when people have to sort of head out on their own. During the Chiang Rai cave rescue of the football team, which you probably remember, it was in the news and several films have been made about it. Divers had to operate independently in order to execute that rescue. But I would say that that's really the province of high-level technical and professional divers. And I'm not sure I ever aspire to dive alone, to be honest. I quite enjoy snorkeling and swimming by myself. But if I'm down there with scuba equipment, I want to know that there's someone with me who's got a backup system that I can fall back on if something goes wrong with mine, and vice versa, that I'll be able to help them if theirs plays up. So solo diving isn't an aspiration of mine, but I can see why people would want to do it, and I can absolutely see why it's necessary in some circumstances.
Yeah. And if anybody was listening who has never been diving but had always thought, yeah, it's kind of something I'd really like to do, but I don't know where to start, and what advice would you give them?
I would recommend finding a local dive centre, or if you live somewhere where the visibility is often not great, like in the UK, and you'd rather start somewhere where where conditions are friendlier to divers, where the water's warmer and clearer, then go abroad, find yourself a reputable dive centre, and just say you'd like to do a try dive. They're used to people doing this. They help people all the time who've got no experience whatsoever, who may be frightened of diving. That's often the way that an entire life of diving and of discovering the wonders of seas and lakes begins. So don't be afraid. It took me a couple of forays into dive shops before I finally, took the plunge and actually did a try dive. But there will be people in that shop who've had a similar journey to the one that you might be embarking on. So and they're often extremely keen to pass that torch. It's really a kind of culture, scuba diving, and it's an access way to an enchanted world. And you'll find friendly, smiley faces in most dive centres. And even the less friendly looking, serious looking people are often your friend as well, and will be excellent tutors in the sport. Or I don't always want to call it a sport. To me, I see it as a discipline, because it's something serious but incredibly rewarding, like any pursuit, like the pursuit of playing a musical instrument or of writing or of sports. But it's a wonderful one, and it's one worth looking into if you've ever had a thought about breathing underwater and what that might feel like, and of having marine life encounter you as something exotic. These are wonderful things, and I'd say don't deny yourself the chance to have a go at that.
Yeah. And are there different rules in different parts of the world? I remember when I was in Thailand, over 20 years ago now, and I really wanted to have a go at diving, but you had to do it. There wasn't the chance to go on a try dive, as you say. You had to do a whole PADI course, and it was quite an intense thing. And I know that's the way to get into diving properly. You have to do the PADI course, but to just go out there and have a go, does that depend on the diving school sometimes?
Well, no one's going to let you put the gear on and just jump into the sea without some basic training. So what I'm referring to as a try dive, I did it under the PADI system, so this is something that they offer. So you'll have some basic sort of schooling in what the equipment is, and then you'll put it on with some help to assemble it you put it on, and then normally you'd get into a swimming pool and swim around and then get to the bottom and practice the basic skills that you need, like clearing your mask, retrieving your regulator if it comes out, clearing your regulator, that kind of thing. So you'll have to do some basic skills before anyone's going to take you out into a wild, natural environment. But you don't need to pass your basic PADI open water diver qualification in order to try scuba diving. But it's a way that many people would begin is they think, well, if I intend to do this anyway, I might as well start off by getting the qualification. And I'd say that's probably fair enough. I just wanted to know that I wasn't going to freak out completely. So a tri-dive was the way in for me. Yeah. There are lots of different organizations that certify people to scuba dive. PADI's the most famous of them. In the UK, we also have BZAC. There are lots of organizations. I think the appeal of PADI is it's the most recognized. So it is going to be the least questioned possibly if you find yourself in a foreign country and you're suddenly looking to do a dive somewhere. But that's not to say that all the certifying organizations aren't equally respected, at least in theory. So I'm not here to advertise any particular organizations or decry any of them. They all have slightly different origin stories and they can have slightly different heritages. So an organization like BZAC has a slightly more military heritage, as I understand it. And originally the people teaching those skills had learned them in life or death environments and treated scuba diving with an attendant level of seriousness. And there's a real commitment to teach skills kind of one by one and to slowly build them up. But really, as long as you're diving with someone reputable and you can see that they're accredited and they're going to be responsible for your safety, and they're making sure that you've done all the forms and that sort of thing, you can be sure that you're in safe hands. Yeah. If anyone's trying to sort of get you to spend money and they seem to be rushing you through forms and that kind of thing, then that would certainly make my alarm bells ring, and it probably should yours if you're worried about your safety.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important, isn't it? If they're saying, oh, we don't need to do that. Oh, we don't need to. No, let's just get in the water. Even though you might think, oh, this is easy. It'll be worth thinking again. Oh, maybe they should be taking a little bit more care about this.
That's not the kind of language I'd want to hear from a scuba operation, because you've got to remember that this is you can refer to it as an extreme sport, or I'd call it a dangerous technological physical discipline. The numbers are mind-boggling when you think about them. A scuba cylinder has been compared to having a bomb strapped to your back. That's the amount of pressure that exists in that. I mean, they're a very safe piece of equipment when they're properly maintained, but the physics doesn't lie. 10 meters of seawater weighs as much as the entire atmosphere of planet Earth, stretching from the ground to space above sea level. So that's the amount of pressure that your body is being placed under and that your equipment has to cope with when you're at a depth of just 10 meters. So you absolutely need to know that you're working with people who properly maintain their gear and are very concerned with their own safety and with yours. Yeah. Because remember, if they're unsafe, they can't help you if you get into a tight spot as well. So it's your job as someone who's going into this to make sure that you do your due diligence, really.
Yeah. Yeah, good advice. Well, if people want to get a copy of The Drowned Places, Diving in Search of Atlantis, it's available on our website, TRE.radio. It's by Damian Labasse, who we've been chatting with today. Damian, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to chat.